So let's talk about the first six and the Great War. To kick it off, who were the first six? The first six were initially desperate to save their people when they approached the dragon dens more than 600 years ago. We'll get to why they needed to save their people in a minute. These dragons bonded the first six and made them riders. Interestingly, these first six were not the first to actually become riders. They were simply the first to survive. My assumption is that humans had tried riding dragons throughout history. Hey, maybe that ancient king tried to ride a dragon. I don't know that. But these first six and the times that they were living in were different. And maybe the dragons helped make sure they survived, unlike dragons in the past, because the dragons needed wards from these bonded humans. Speaking of which, let it be known, dragons bonded humans only to protect their hatching grounds from venom, who were the bigger threat during this Great War and beyond. After all, dragons cannot weave wards or runes. Only humans who are bonded can. More than 600 years later, both species continue to use the other for their own gain. They have a mutually beneficial relationship. That is to say, both dragons and humans still have their own secrets and their own agendas, but they really do need each other for protection and survival. Hence why we have the system that we have today with dragons and riders. We only know of two of the first six's names, at least as of right now. Warwick of Lucerys, his native language was Old Lucerys, which his journal was written in. Now, he did lie about how to establish wards in his journal so the wards could not be recreated. Warwick never wanted anyone else to hold the power of the wards, intending for Navarre to always have the upper hand. His lie was that there were 6 dragons, but of course there were actually 7. The other of the first 6 that we know of is Lyra of Moraine. She, unlike Warwick, wanted the information about creating wards to be shared. She was alone in thinking that the protection and knowledge of the wards should benefit more than just Navarre. And in her words, it cost her everything. Her native language was Moranian, so of course her journal was written in Moranian as well. The only other information we know about the first 6 is that they had complex interpersonal relationships. I really hope that we learn more about this in later books. I don't know if we will, but maybe. And that they fought multiple battles in the Great War. Speaking of which, let's move on to the Great War. It occurred 600 years ago, about the same time, and ultimately the reason why the first 6 bonded dragons. The enemy of the first 6 in this Great War was General Darmor, while Navarre and assumably Pormiel's allies were the Isle Kingdoms. The Isle Kingdoms helped win the war. However, Navarre cut them off when they put their wards up, and nobody's been allowed to travel there for hundreds of years. General Darmor ruined the Barrens region, causing all dragons to abandon the land. The Barrens is sucked dry of magic and life, leaving it a dry, desert-covered peninsula in the southeast part of the continent. Consider it venom territory these days. Now, in the mountains of the Steel Ridge Range, the green dragons offered their ancestral hatching grounds to be the ward source for the good of dragonkind. Wards of Navarre were woven by the first 6 at what is now Basgiath War College. This location was chosen because these green dragons have an especially stable connection to magic, thanks to their more reasonable defensive nature, so it was only reasonable for their hatching grounds to be the location of the wardstone. The first 6 didn't just establish the wards, but they personally carved the first wardstone. Emphasis on first wardstone, meaning they probably carved at least one other, such as the wardstone in Orisha, or maybe even a third one somewhere else, like Nicole and I were speculating earlier. Now, we'll go into unification in a later episode's archives, but for now, the Great War is what led these first 6 to bond with dragons. Being bonded to dragons enabled them to establish the wards. However, it's my current understanding that the unification occurred after the Great War. The wards were most likely active, and Pormiel had 1 year to come across the border and therefore cross into the protection of the wards before everything was closed off to eliminate further exposure and danger. But back to the Great War. Some kind of weapon killed off the venom during this Great War, and I believe that we can safely assume this is what ended the Great War. Maybe combined with the wards being in place. Like, again, the timeline is a little bit iffy, but I'm guessing that it went wards, end of Great War, and then unification. But what? This weapon? I wish that I had more that I could tell you about this weapon, because it is super mysterious. That was literally one tiny little half line that we got out of it, and it just breaks my heart to not be able to expand on the facts about this weapon in the archives. One more thing to note about all of this between the first 6 and the Great War and the end of it, there is a book in the Orisha Library that has an accounting of the first emergence of venom after the Great War. At least that's what Violet thinks the book is about. It's very clear in the narration that she just thinks that's what it's about, which seems a little ominous, and another one of those little promises that maybe we'll learn more. There's some very ambiguous information around the end of the Great War, this weapon, and venom. And again, which to me, they're all just promises that we'll learn more about this in later books, and specifically that timeline and how it all played out these 600 years ago.
I do not think it is an accident that Andarna is technically 600 plus years old, and there was a weapon that helped kill off the Venin 600 years ago.